So with that, Rob, right on. Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming out this morning. I'm very, very pleased with the workshop that we have set up for everybody today. This is a workshop that, having read the book and having applied the concepts that you're going to learn today, has helped me to be more successful in my career, helped me to get points across more crystal clear with more clarity in my personal life, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun today. So I'd like to start off with welcoming everybody who's time to San Jose today, as well as everybody who is joining us from Bellevue, Washington, from Irvine, and all those people out in the online community joining us via WebEx. So to give you an idea and to put into practice how this whole event came out, I'm going to tell you a story. And I'm going to tell you that story with a very simple picture. What I'm going to talk about is how I use simple pictures to close the biggest and most important deal in my entire life. And that biggest, most important deal was the first date with a beautiful woman who is now my wife. And so, a way to start out to provide a little bit of background, I had an opportunity. I met this beautiful woman. I was sitting next to her on a bus. I was in New Zealand. I asked her if she would join me for dinner that night. She had never had Thai food. I thought, you know, what a great first date, first time trying Thai food. So we went to a Thai restaurant. She leaned across the table to me and pointed to the menu and said, "What is this? What does this say?" And I said, "Well, it's celery. You know, so vegetable, it's green. Some people like peanut butter, it's crunchy." She kind of looked at me and said, "I don't understand." So I should probably tell you, my wife's from Brazil. So when we met 8 years ago, she didn't really speak much English at all. I spoke zero Portuguese. So now as our first date's underway, and it's kind of another longer story how we got to the first date, but now that the first date's underway, we have a language barrier that we need to overcome to really make the most of the dinner for me to be able to get to a second date. So I went to the bar. I procured a bar napkin, and I very simply just drew what my rendition was of celery. This place didn't sell it, so I had to do the more traditional approach that everybody's used to, especially peanut butter lovers, you know. And she said, apple. And that's celery. And I said, okay, great. You know, so now we have a commonality here. So what was really fun about it is, you know, we figured celery. I learned my first word in Portuguese. And what I could see is there was kind of a spark at the table. When I started to draw, she leaned next to me. You know, it's like, oh, this is working out pretty good. And so I wanted to kind of, you know, really keep this moving along. Later on throughout our date, as our meal comes and she's enjoying her celery, and she's telling me that, you know, I said, what do you like to do with your family? What are some of the things? Well, we do lots of churrasco. Like, she grabbed a napkin. She drew a very simple picture for me. And the picture looks something like this. Churrasco. Maybe. So I said, oh, okay, barbecue. You like to barbecue with your family. And then here I go down to Brazil, they have a big, beautiful wood-burning barbecue and everything else. And so at the end of the day, it turned out that we had a lot of fun, fell in love, and a few years later, we were married. And so we actually have a copy of this little napkin at our house, which we tend to reflect on quite a bit. Remember, you know, kind of how we met, how we used very simple pictures to cross the language barrier. And here I am now 8 years later with a beautiful wife and a beautiful 2-year-old boy, and it all started on the back of a napkin. So, gee, sorry, Rob, great. Why do we bring everybody out here? What does this have to do with business and everything else? When I had returned from my travels and I wanted to get back into the technology industry, there's a lot of opportunities out there. A lot of different companies do a lot of different things. The reason I came to Nexus is because they had a very unique strategy in how they engage with their customers. And that was by building out a collaboration network. And that collaboration network allows us to partner with our manufacturer partners that we work with and to have a much greater dialogue with them, have face-to-face meetings with business units here in San Jose. We support product stuff so that we can prepare our people. We also then take that experience that we have and we are able to collaborate with, my lady figure picture. And then this, of course, would be my propeller head engineer picture. But we're able to collaborate with the experienced engineers that we have, people that have been connecting with our manufacturer partners, learning everything they can about this product. And what ends up happening with that is now we are able to create really good ideas and solutions for our customers. And, okay, great, simple pictures, you get to draw on your logo, that's really cool. This is where it all came together for me. Around mid-2008, I was on a cross-country flight, and I happened to be sitting next to the CEO of a software company. And so for the 5.5 hours that I had to talk his ear off, I found out that he had put me in touch with this book. He said, have you ever heard of this book called Back of the Napkin? I said, no. He said, well, very similar to kind of what you were explaining with all the whiteboards and techniques and everything you have, but Dan's concept is really that you can solve any problem, no matter how complex it is, with some very, very simple pictures. They don't need to be beautiful pictures, just very simple and to the point. As Dan alluded to, the fastest way to get something that's in my head into your head is to draw it out in a very simple picture. So, literally stepping off the airplane, scouring the airport bookstore, I found Back of the Napkin. And I brought it home and I started reading through it. What I found was it wasn't so much he was teaching me how to draw stick figures or graphs or anything else. What he was teaching me was how to take my 60-slide company story about how great our company is and all the certifications and awards and boil it down to a couple simple pictures so that I don't spend 60 minutes delivering PowerPoint and have 5 minutes left with my customer. Instead, I can articulate the value proposition of our company in 1 or 2 minutes where they're going to get it very quickly. And I can spend the rest of that time actually talking about how we can work with them to collaborate and develop solutions. And so before I turn it over to Dan here, I'm going to leave you with one more very simple picture. And this is a picture that's going to represent what you can expect to get out of this workshop today. I'm just going to start with 2 circles. The first circle is going to represent all of the great ideas that are going to flow out of everybody today when you leave this meeting. When you pick up the napkin, you start drawing on it. When you take a look through the book, what Dan has to offer, you're going to instantly get how these simple pictures can help you to be successful in your business and in your personal life. The second picture represents that success. This is you, and this is wherever you want to go. So this is my simple picture to demonstrate what you're going to get out of this workshop today is ideas to make you successful and how to bring it all together with simple pictures. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dan Rome, author of Back of the Napkin. I have to thank you. That is, without a doubt, the most entertaining and enthusiastic introduction I have ever received. Nobody has, and we're talking lots and lots of presentations, no one has ever taken this message so much to heart to get married. They were able to draw Back of the Napkin. I have similar stories that I will not bore you with today. I did, of course, want to thank all of you for coming. And I really want to thank the folks at Nexus and at Cisco for putting on this event. But then I thought about that as a way to lead in, and I realized what I really wanted to do is I do want to thank you, but not so much for showing up, but more thank all of you for whether you're here or whether you're in Bellevue or one of the remote locations, but thank you for letting me come into your business life for this hour and a half. Because I recognize I am no expert by any stretch of the imagination in the things that you are experts in your job. And so I appreciate tremendously this kind of leap of faith that you've made to come listen to someone talk about solving problems with pictures. And I have to share with you a couple of stories. Since the book has come out and it has done well, which is very exciting, I really have had this extraordinary opportunity to go and share these ideas with this extraordinary array of different types of businesses and organizations. And I have to tell you that in many cases, and for those of you that are consultants, I'm sure you'll recognize this, in many cases, I'll go into a business and I won't actually know a whole lot about what they do. And I'm expected to kind of come in and know something and perform. But it's not really been that big of a challenge because the approach that we're going to talk about today seems to be so universal. And let me just start with a couple of examples. So about a year and a half ago, I had a chance to go up to Seattle, to Willis, in fact, and address the folks at Boeing. Now, I am no aeronautical engineer, but it was fantastic to spend half a day with a number of the people that are project managers on the Boeing 787, on the new Dreamliner aircraft.
that will be, well, has finally had a successful flight, and it's promised to be this revolution in aviation. Now, the really interesting thing is talking with these engineers. Here they are, and these project managers building what is arguably the most sophisticated machine that has ever been created, and it's being built to within tolerances of millionths of an inch. And it's being built in something like 22 different countries at the same time. The components are built from Italy to Singapore, all shipped back to Seattle, or a new facility that I believe will be opening up in Alabama, and then put back together just as, when kids, for anybody who might have built a model airplane. Well, this is the real thing. And I was saying, how can you do that? How can you build a machine like this in so many different places? Well, the fact is, because everything is done with pictures. Every single type of communication is done with pictures. As Rob pointed out, pictures, of course, they transcend the language barrier. That's kind of a no-brainer. But they go far further than that. And we will explore, before this morning is out, a number of the kind of the cognitive and neurobiological reasons why it is that simple pictures are so extraordinarily powerful for us as a way to discover ideas, develop ideas on our own or with a team, share those ideas, tremendous number of possibilities. Another example of an organization that I had a chance to visit not too long ago was the United States Senate. We'll talk about this more in detail as we go into the session. But I was invited by the United States Senate, by the new policy committee, to come out and talk to the Senate. So I do not have a background in politics. And I will admit that before I arrived in D.C., I really didn't have a very good idea of what the Senate actually does. Now, in spite of everything I'm going to share with you today, I spent half a day with the folks from the new policy committee. We drew a bunch of really interesting pictures, really clarified some ideas in my mind about policy, and I still have no idea what the Senate actually does. But nevertheless, the point I want to make, and what I'd like to share with you today is I do have, and Rob already told you what it is, a very simple proposition that I share with all of these different organizations, and it's what I'd like to share with you this morning. And it goes like this, and it is extraordinarily simple. Whatever our problems might be, we can solve our problems with pictures. I mean it. We can solve our problems with pictures. Now, I know that that is a grossly oversimplified statement, but I also know that it is completely true. And I can say it with 100% conviction because in hundreds of different meetings that I have now participated in, I have never seen it come to pass that when someone is trying to explain an idea or share a concept, when they start drawing a picture, it always helps move the conversation forward. And more interesting than that, it's by beginning to start drawing out that picture that people around the table, around that picture, automatically begin to see solutions to the problem that they would not have seen if they just talked about it. Absolutely guaranteed that it works. Now, I also know, though, I like to put myself in your seat and imagine, if someone got up in front of me and said, hey, we can solve problems with pictures, I would admittedly be a little bit dubious. And I'd like to think that I'd have the presence of mind to ask 3 questions. I don't think I would, but I'd like to think that I would. We can solve problems with pictures. Okay, so which problems are we talking about? Which pictures are we talking about? And which people are we talking about? Namely, who is going to do this? Who's going to draw these pictures? Because, I can't draw. Well, I like those 3 questions. And in fact, I want to use those 3 questions really as kind of the agenda for what we're going to talk about for the rest of the hour. And let's just start running through them. Here we go. The very quick Cliff Notes, super executive summary, 4-minute long, complete summary of everything we're going to talk about for the rest of this hour. Which problems are we talking about? All of them. Any problem that we have the ability to articulate at all, we have the ability to articulate infinitely more clearly through the use of pictures. Brings us to question number 2. Which pictures are we talking about? Extraordinarily simple. We do not require sophisticated software. We do not need years of training or a tremendous amount of artistic talent. We have already innately all of the talent we already need. And I'd like us to prove it to ourselves. You all have napkins, both you here and those of you that are viewing us virtually. If you don't have napkins, go ahead and find something you can draw on. No stress. I don't want anyone to worry about this. I'd like you to follow along with me. And if you can draw something that looks like a square, and if you can draw something that looks like a circle, we're going to get trickier now. If you can draw an arrow connecting them, Most difficult of all, if you can draw a stick figure and make it a happy stick figure, you can draw every problem and every picture that we're going to be talking about. That automatically answers this third question, doesn't it? Who is going to do this? We are all going to do this. We are all, by simple virtue of being human, we are fundamentally visual creatures. Let me just throw a data point or two at you. If this circle represents our entire capacity neurobiologically to process incoming sensory information, this circle represents all of the neurons that we have that are responsible for processing information that is coming in through all of our senses. Everything we know about the world around us that we gather through our senses. 3/4 of those are focused on vision. The one thing that our brain has the most amount of processing capacity dedicated toward is vision. More than any other thing that we do, our brain is a vision machine beyond anything else. You know, and we already know this. I'm just going to ask, how many people have, it's not my business, I'm going to ask anyway, how many people have kids who have been through kindergarten or are in kindergarten? How many people themselves have been through kindergarten and made it? Think about this for just a second. If you ever have a chance, go to a kindergarten class, and of course, with the teacher's permission, ask the 6-year-old 2 questions. Ask them, how many of you can draw? Every hand is going to go up. And then ask them, that's great, and how many of you can read and write? And 2 hands are going to go up. One, because they don't know what you're talking about. The other one, because he or she really can read or write. There are kindergartners who can do it, but it's truly exceptional. But the point of this is, imagine now coming back to the class 10 years later, 16-year-olds in 10th grade, and ask the same 2 questions. What's going to happen? How many of you can draw? You're going to get a couple of hands up. How many of you can read and write? Oh, yeah, I can do that. Everybody can read and write. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with learning how to read and write. That is absolutely fundamental and critical. But what is wrong is the fact that from the time we're age 6, and we knew how to understand the world visually, up until the time that we're, say, 16 or 36 or 56, nobody ever tells us or encourages us to use this incredibly powerful visual thinking machine that we're born with. And that, to me, is what the real shame is. And so, what I'd like to share with you for the rest of the time that we have are a couple of fundamental, I would say, unwritten rules of why it is that visual problem solving is so powerful and why it is that it is so neglected. And hopefully, we'll get excited about the first one and maybe excited enough to begin to address the second one, because this is something that should be taught in every MBA school, in every MBA class. There should be something around visual problem solving, and there's not. So 2 unwritten rules of visual problem solving that I'm going to share with you today. The first one is this. Unwritten rule number 1. Whoever best describes the problem is the person most likely to solve the problem. The example that I give, think about Chicken Little come running into the office and say, oh my goodness, the sky is falling. Give me money to fix it. I don't think so. But imagine if Chicken Little came in and said, I have identified that there's a problem emerging. It involves these people. It involves them in these kinds of areas. Here is where these people at this event intersect. Here is when they intersect. Here's some of the numbers behind what I found. Who is going to be the person who's already begun to solve the problem? Or Chicken Little who's been able to draw it out. The mercenary subtext behind all of this is, literally, and this is true, whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. I'm going to prove it to you. What I'd like to do, right off the bat, is take a little trip from where we are here in the Bay Area. We've got people up in the Seattle area, we've got people down in the Irvine area, and we may have people all over the place. I want to take a little trip out to Washington, D.C. I mentioned earlier that I was invited by the Senate to come give a talk. I want to tell you a little bit about that. But before I do, I would just like to ask if anybody might know why I'm using a Southwest Airlines napkin as a basis for our little tour. The reason is this. Back in 1967, in San Antonio, Texas, at the St. Anthony's Club, 2 businessmen are sitting there. We don't know what they were drinking, but we do know what they were talking about, and we do know what they were drawing. It's absolutely true. Herb and Rollins. And they're talking about what a pain in the butt it is to try to get around Texas. It's a huge state, it takes too long to drive. And you cannot fly from one major city to another on any commercial carrier. It just isn't done in those times. So Rollins, on his cocktail napkin, says, Herb, I have an idea. Imagine if this is Texas. Down here we have Houston, and up here we have Dallas, and over here we have San Antonio. Why don't we make an airline that just connects those three cities? Herb says, I think that's a great idea. Let's go ahead and do it. The airline that started on the back of that napkin was Southwest Airlines. Literally started on the back of the napkin, Robin King and Herb Kelleher. The most successful airline that has ever existed. The only airline in the world that has been profitable every single quarter since it started, with one exception. 3 quarters ago, Southwest Airlines, for the first time since 1972, which is when it finally flew, had its first unprofitable quarter. But the good news is, it did recover, and Southwest has now been profitable again for the last 2 quarters. As of a month ago, last time I checked, Southwest was the only airline in the United States presently profitable. The only reason that airlines have been so successful is because it started on the back of a napkin. That is my story, and I'm staying with it. We're not going to talk about hedging on oil prices or a lot of other clever things. But the power of a simple idea that everybody gets. Everybody understands because it is simple and it is visual. We're going to take our trip back to DC now. Let me share with you a story that I think has not had as successful and happy an outcome as Southwest Airlines has. I was invited to come up to the Senate. Research in advance. I wanted to find examples of political stories that had been, or political ideas that had been started on the back of a napkin. I started to do my research. I didn't find anything that I really liked, but I found something else that I thought was really, really cool. And I want to share this with you. This is a map drawn, the year is up here, yeah, 1766. This is a map of Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon was George Washington's estate outside of the Washington area. Who do you think in 1766 might have been drawing a picture of this property of Mount Vernon? Remember, it was George Washington's estate. George Washington drew this picture. I didn't know this. It turns out that George Washington was trained as a map maker and a surveyor, and he drew all the time. His notebooks are full of his sketches. I thought, this is interesting. Let's continue. Here we have, this is the actual piece of White House stationery. This is actually Oval Office stationery. Someone is drawing a picture of a boat. But I don't know, looks like a chessboard or something, maybe an eraser. A NATO flag, Castro in a box, blockade Cuba in a circle. Does anyone want to guess who might have been drawing this picture? JFK. John F. Kennedy was drawing this during the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 1962, as he was on the phone, helping to negotiate to make sure that we didn't go into nuclear Armageddon. Those were the pictures that he was drawing. Here's another interesting one. Clearly we have a president with a lot on his mind. Does anyone want to guess what president might have drawn this picture? Someone always gets it right. I'm not hearing it here. No? Do I hear Nixon? Richard Nixon. I see a couple of nods. Yeah. Richard Nixon was drawing it. Interestingly enough, there are people who have gone back and done some kind of forensic IQ study, trying to determine what was the relative IQ of presidents going back, say, 100 years based on their writing and their speaking and whatnot. Turns out that Nixon was probably, from an IQ perspective, one of the smartest people who's ever been in the White House. But it turns out Clinton was also very high on that list as well. But you really got to ask, clearly, given that picture, what does that mean? Clearly someone with a lot on his mind. Here's another easy one, especially for those of us in California. Anyone want to guess who might have been drawing these pictures? President Reagan was drawing these pictures. Very talented. I mean, that is a nice-looking horse. That's a good drawing. Now, in fact, it turns out that often Reagan would draw. In cabinet meetings, he would start to doodle, and there are some really compelling neurobiological reasons why doodling is actually a really good thing to do. We'll talk about that in a little while as well. It actually helps you think more clearly. Anybody ever been in a class when they were a kid when the teacher said, stop fidgeting? We know how it is these days. They actually give kids things to fidget with. You now understand that when your motor actions are moving, if you're doodling, you're actually paying more attention to what you're hearing. So after I was able to go through this session with the Senate, a guy named Doug Steiger, who's the head of new policy for the Democratic side of the Senate, came up to me and said, Dan, thank you for the presentation. Wonderful. I've got the perfect political back of the napkin story for you. And he shared this story, and I checked it out. This is all true. So this goes back to 1974. An economist named Arthur Laffer. Now, Laffer was a prominent economist from USC, but in those days, in the 70s, he was spending a lot of time in Washington serving as a consultant with the Ford administration. One night, Laffer goes out to a bar, it's always taking place in a bar, with two other gentlemen from the Ford administration. And again, we don't know what they were drinking, but we know what they were drawing. They got talking about taxation, and Laffer drew the following picture on his napkin. He made a very simple little XY plot, something that all of us have done at one time or another. And on the horizontal axis, he said, okay, we're talking about taxation. Let's plot out the percent tax rate that the government charges us on our income. What percent income tax are we going to pay? From 0% up to 100%. And on the vertical axis, we'll plot out how much money the government actually makes from zero money up to lots and lots of money. I said, okay, that makes sense, right? If the government charges us 0% income tax, how much money is the government going to make? Zero. And he said, but, bear with me on this. If the government charges us 100% income tax, how much money will the government make? Also zero, because no one will work. If we have to pay 100% of our income out as tax, what's the point? I'll just stay home. Why would I work at all? So then he drew something that became known as the Laffer curve. He said, actually, there is a curve along which we can plot the various rates of income versus taxation rate. And isn't it interesting, gentlemen, he said, at some point, the more we reduce the rate of taxation, the more we actually increase the amount of money that the government collects. This became known as the Laffer curve. The first iteration that we know of in public was this napkin that he drew with these two gentlemen at the bottom. The two guys that he was with thought this was a pretty fascinating way to look at taxation. They said, can we take that napkin? He said, absolutely. They took it back to their boss, who was President Ford. The napkin found its way into the hands of the Republican National Committee and into the beginning of the Reagan economic team. This napkin literally became the basis of Reaganomics, of supply-side economics. When someone would come to Reagan and say, wait a minute, President, I don't understand. Why is it again that we're reducing the rate of taxation, especially for the wealthy, in order to increase the amount of government that we collect? He would draw that picture, and they would say, okay, Mr. President, I got it. Thank you. Now, the two guys that Laffer was sitting with as he was drawing that picture were these two guys. They were the ones who passed it off to Ford and took that napkin. These two guys are these two guys. Pretty remarkable staying power that simple picture on the back of that napkin has. That picture has really become the basis for economic policy in the United States for much of the last 30 years. You know, it does beg the question, who said a simple picture drawn on the back of a napkin does not have extraordinary influence? It does. The person who draws the best picture gets the funding. Why? Because when we understand what we're looking at, when we truly understand it, we believe in it. We are able to argue it. We're able to debate it. We're able to get it. When we understand something, we'll talk again more about this later on. When we have a moment of that light bulb that Rob was on, that sudden moment where we get something, we get a little shiver down the back of our spine. The same endorphins and dopamine and chemicals that kick into our brain during times of pleasure kick in. We take enormous pleasure in understanding something. And when we feel that, we feel positive about the idea that we've just been shown. Now, we're clearly in a very different time now. Rumsfeld and Cheney are no longer in power. We're in a very different time. Does anyone want to guess who might have drawn this picture? That's right, the B and the O are a dead giveaway. Barack Obama drew this picture. It turns out that President Obama used to draw a lot. I don't think that he's doing a whole lot of drawing these days, and I wish he would. One of the things, regardless of what anyone may think about President Obama from a political point of view, one of the things everyone can agree on is he is one of the most articulate public speakers that I've ever known, that I've ever seen. Brilliant ability to convey an idea with enthusiasm and clarity verbally. But But the question I have is, given the range of problems and challenges that we face today, whether it's the economy, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it is healthcare, you name it, these things are complex problems. Why are we not seeing the pictures? There's another little nuance I just want to point out, which isn't really apropos of anything, but it's just an interesting data point. President Obama is left-handed, which by and of itself doesn't mean anything. There is, however, some correlation, it appears, between people who are left-handed and people who may have a preference for solving problems and looking at the world in a more spatial kind of a way. We all know about right brain, left brain. I'm not going to go into that a lot, but that's been kind of debunked. It's a gross oversimplification of how the brain really works. But there's something compelling about the idea that we've got a linear way of thinking and a more spatial way. People left-handed tend to be more predominantly spatial in the way they think. Here's a remarkable point. 5 of the last 7 U.S. presidents have been left-handed. 7% of the population in the United States is left-handed. 5 of the last 7 presidents have been left-handed. It would appear that perhaps there may be something about a person's ability to approach a problem from a spatial perspective that allows that person to have a broad enough view to be able to start to think about managing something as complex and unwieldy as the United States. Just an interesting data point. But given that, I still ask, where are our pictures, Mr. President? We know you can draw, we know you can think clearly. Where are our pictures that help us understand what the vision really is? And the case that I want to take with you through just for a few moments is, in fact, healthcare. I promise this will not become political. This will become about clarity. Regardless of what your thoughts may be on the particular politics or outcomes of the healthcare debate, I can guarantee you this. Nobody in any administration ever anticipated or desired the extraordinary level of anxiety and fighting that we're getting into over healthcare. These last 6 months have just been wild. That was never the intent. It is my belief that for most people, the real issue is not that people necessarily disagree with what's being said in Washington. I think the real fundamental issue is that people do not understand what's being said in Washington. And that's not our fault, that's Washington's fault. And here's the case I'd like to make. We all know that this healthcare debate has raged on and there's been a tremendous amount of energy generated around it. I thought, okay, look, we know that the administration, when it started out on this 9 months ago, must have had a pretty clear vision of what it wanted to achieve. Must have had a pretty clear vision, and I use that word intentionally. We don't talk about that. What's the vision statement for our company? What's the vision for this? Vision is an interesting term, isn't it? It comes from sight. Vision does not say, give me a bullet list. Vision says, give me a picture. What is the picture of where I am today versus where I'm going to be tomorrow? I downloaded, this is the House bill that passed. This is the House healthcare legislation bill that passed last October. House Resolution 3962. I downloaded it because I wanted to see what it is that we're getting all so cranked up about. I'm sure that the vision for healthcare reform must be buried in this document somewhere. I figured, well, there's no picture on the first couple of pages because this is a very important government document. So I looked through it. The picture is not in the first 8 pages. The picture is not in the first 64 pages. The picture is not in the first 288 pages. The picture is nowhere in the 1,447 pages that define the law that was passed. This is an unreadable document. There is no one on earth who can read this document and actually understand all of the nuances of what it says. It is impossible. One would think that given the tremendous amount of importance that has been assigned to this, someone would make the effort to say, I will create a summary of the actual issues that are at stake in this piece of legislation so that it can become understandable. Because how else can we intelligently vote one way or the other? Well, nobody in Washington has done it, so I thought, well, if I really believe in my stick, that we can solve problems with pictures, maybe I should try to do it. Now, I have worked with healthcare companies in the past, but I am by no stretch of the imagination an expert on healthcare in America. But I know people who are. The benefit of being a consultant, you always know someone who's smarter than you. So I called a good friend of mine, a former colleague that I've worked with, really smart consultant, Tony Jones, down in L.A. Now, what makes Tony interesting is he has both an MBA and an MD, which is a pretty remarkable combination of educational background. So Tony knows everything. He's worked with every healthcare company you can imagine. I called Tony up and I said, I'm coming down to L.A. I'm bringing with me legislation, what we can find online, print out. screenshots of it. Between that and your knowledge of the nuances of the healthcare system in America, we are going to lock ourselves in your office and we're not leaving until we come up with a limited number of simple pictures that explain the essentials of what the healthcare legislation and landscape is actually about. Not about death panels, not about killing grandma. What does it actually say? And we did. So we created a set of simple pictures. I'm just going to share 3 of them with you, not to belabor the point of healthcare, but to show you how simple the pictures are and the tremendous amount of insight they can convey precisely because they are simple. And I'm just going to throw a couple of points at you, things that we learned by drawing out healthcare in America. The first thing that we realized is that unlike any other developed economy on earth, healthcare in America is a profit-driven business. As long as everybody understands that, then all other questions suddenly make sense. What's really interesting is it's not one business, it is actually 2 businesses, 2 completely distinct businesses. One is the business of the providers, the doctors, the hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, the people who make money by making us healthy. The other business is the business of the payers, the people who make money by funding the operations, literally, by funding the entire business and making sure that the money moves. Those are the insurance companies. The problem is this. Over the last 20 years, these 2 businesses have come to hate each other. Because both of them believe that they should be the driver in deciding how we take care of our health care. All of a sudden, we begin to see where the real issue is that as a tax-paying employed citizen, we are the only source of money going into this healthcare business. There is no other magic source of money. It is coming from the taxes that we pay. As both sides seek to maximize their profitability, we end up becoming the one that is squeezed. It becomes more difficult for us to pay, and our businesses start to fail because of the incredible costs that are driven by both sides trying to maximize their profits. Government looks at this situation, the President administration looks at this situation, says it is unsustainable, businesses are failing, we must address it. They look at it and they decide that the legislation that needs to be thought about, 90% of it reforms the payer side of the equation. There's very little in the legislation, even that has most recently passed, that says doctors must perform their operations in a different way, hospitals must change who they accept. All of the legislation focuses on the insurance side, and so on. And out of this, one can then draw a spectrum, a very simple spectrum, of all of the legislation that was on the table, from the most conservative to the most progressive, and map every single piece of legislation to a very simple, one-dimensional, two-dimensional axis, and see where every piece of legislation falls. I'm not going to go into it any further, but the point I want to make is, I drew these pictures with Tony. I created a PowerPoint document, and I put it online on a site called SlideShare. Within a matter of some weeks, I got close to 250,000 downloads, and that's now past 250,000 downloads. And I thought, well, that's not that big a deal, right? Lady Gaga has a new video, and all of a sudden she's got like 30 million downloads overnight. But think about this. This is 250,000 downloads of a PowerPoint document about health care. I mean, what could be more boring on earth? And yet somehow, at least 250,000 people have found this maybe entertaining, but at least enlightening. And I'll tell you, I have had responses from all sides of the political spectrum. There have been hundreds and hundreds of responses that have generated. I did not know that I was a communist, libertarian, neo-fascist. I didn't know that I was all those things. I thought I was just trying to explain visually what the legislation actually said. It's interesting by being the messenger. But what happened was all of the responses say the same thing. Thank you for finally clarifying what the healthcare debate is actually about. Now I get it. And now I'll go my particular direction, but at least we understand what we're talking about. Well, the PowerPoint got picked up by the Huffington Post and then the Washington Post, and then one day I get a call from Fox News. It would be Fox. And Fox says, Dan, since you are clearly one of America's leading experts on healthcare, would you be willing to come on air and explain to the American public what the healthcare reform debate is actually all about? And it was remarkable because I said, sure, absolutely. So Fox gave me 7 minutes, prime time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I was able to go through drawing my pictures of this little slideshow of what healthcare reform was all about. And I have to say, thank Fox for not putting any political spin on it one way or the other, just letting simple visual form. That was a lot of fun. And then I got another call. Anyone know where this is? These are the gates to the kingdom. Yes. So I get a call from the White House Office of Communications. They say, Dan, we'd like to talk with you. So I went to D.C. and I had a meeting with the White House Office of Communications, and I can't really tell you what we said, but I can tell you that it would not be surprising if at some point in the future there may be more use of simple visuals to help explain complex issues around policy. I can share with you that I have had an opportunity since then to work with the Department of Defense, which has been really interesting. What I was told by the people in the White House is that the two departments that really need and desire the most innovative ways to solve problems are the Department of Defense and the Department of State. And so they've been able to help me begin to talk about some of this with some of those folks. The question remains though, and we're going to answer it here in the next 5 minutes. Why is it that even if President Obama knows how to draw, if George Washington knew how to draw, if Ronald Reagan knew how to draw, how come nobody in Washington ever draws out their ideas for us so that we would suddenly get it? Well, I think there are a lot of issues, but one of the things I want to focus on for a moment is I have done some research now. Over the last 5 years almost, in probably something like 450, 460 meetings, similar to this one, I've done a very similar test. And I'm going to ask all of us, those of you that are with us virtually as well, to take this test with me. A very simple, non-threatening test. You won't need to draw anything, just answer some questions. But the result is this. What I have found is that when it comes to visually thinking about ideas, visually solving problems, visually communicating, all of us fall across, again, another one of those very simple sections. And I'm going to give you the answer before we actually do the test. What I have found, and what's remarkable about this is it is industry independent. It doesn't matter. You could be talking to Boeing, or you could be talking to the Senate, or you could be talking to Microsoft, or you could be talking to companies of any variety. You could be talking at any level within the organization. I have not been able to discern any demographic that makes a difference. You always get the same result of this test, regardless of the audience. About 25% of the people in any business audience are what we're going to call the black pen people. We black pen people are the ones who cannot wait. The moment the meeting starts, we can't wait to run up to the whiteboard and start drawing out pictures and say, wait, this is what we're talking about, right? I suspect that Rob might be one of those black pen people. About 50% of us are what we're going to call the yellow pen people, the highlighters. Now, what we do, we yellow pen people, is we sit there and watch this other person draw, and we're kind of intrigued. And essentially, we always do the same thing. After a little while, we stand up and we say, I can't draw, but do you mind if I add something to your picture? And we yellow, that's why I call it the highlighters. We're really good at looking at someone else's picture and seeing what in it is really critical, what really makes a difference. And then we'll go and kind of riff off of that and add our own thoughts on with our own picture that we've added on to someone else. Now, what do I do with this? Just press OK. Okay. About 25% of the people, for those of you with a background in statistics, you'll know we've still got a quarter of people to account for, are what I'm going to call the red pen people. Now, we red pen people, let me crude here for a moment. We are all red pen person at one time or another, are watching these other idiots up there at the whiteboard, thinking, this is all a bunch of crap. They're so grossly oversimplifying the problem, they're probably going to make it worse. Why don't they know what they talk about before they go up there and start talking pictures? The fact is, we red pen people really are the ones who have the greatest grasp of all of the facts and the details and the nuances of what's actually involved in this problem. The trouble is, because we have such a great grasp of all of those facts and details, we usually find it extremely difficult to kind of stomach the idea of simplifying it down to the level of Rowan King's triangle or Arthur Laffer's little curve. But remember, this rule is true. Whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. We need to be able to create that simple picture if we want someone to continue to back us. So, having now given you the answer, for the next 5 minutes or so, we are going to do a little test. And it's very simple. For those of you that are with us virtually, I would like you to do the same thing. Find a piece of paper, something you can draw. I am going to ask a series of questions. Like this one. I'm in a brainstorming session. Can I close this little window somehow? Press the blue light. Oh, this one right here. There. Thank you. Okay, so like this one. I'm in a brainstorming session in a conference room that has a whiteboard, and then I will present you with a series of possible answers. And what I'd like all of you to do is just read through the answers and write down the number on your napkin that's the closest to the answer that works for you. So we'll go back and we'll do question A one more time. I'm in a brainstorming session in a conference room that has a whiteboard. The first thing that I do is read through and write down your answer. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, next question. Someone hands me a pen and asks me to sketch out my idea. Okay, we're going to move on. All right, we're good. Someone hands me a complicated spreadsheet and asks me to look it over. All right, we're going to move on. Just a couple more to go. While traveling home from a conference, for the eve of this meeting, for those of you who may have flown in, I'm going to the airport, and in the airport cafe, I run into someone I saw at the conference, and they say, oh, Mary, what do you do again? I forget, what do you do who you work for? And the way I respond is, And we're going to go to one more question, and this will be the last one. This is an easy one because we've all been there. I'm an astronaut floating in space. The first thing that I do is we are now done with our test. But before we do, I just want to ask, please don't say anything, just by a show of hands. Did anyone notice anything odd about the sequencing of the question? You'll know it if you thought. Did anybody see anything odd about the sequencing of the question? Okay, this is fascinating. Did anyone notice that there was no question E? How many people noticed, be honest, that there was no question E? 2. This is amazing. It tells us something. The reason there is no question E, this is actually the test within the test. A couple of years ago, I was asked to go out and give 2 full-day workshops at Pfizer out in New York. And on day 1, I would be talking to the people in the strategy group, and on day number 2, I was talking to the people in the project management group. On the flight out, I was going through my presentation one more time, what you're never supposed to do on a plane, but I was doing it anyway. And I realized it was still too long, so I needed to just pull some slides out. And one of the slides I pulled out was question E, and it didn't occur to me to resequence them, to change this F to E. And I didn't even know I'd done it. And I went through the workshop with the strategy people, and the workshop was great. We went through the test, we barreled ahead, we did all of our exercises. It was wonderful. The next day, the project management people, I got into the test, and the moment I switched from D to F, the entire room said, stop! Where's E? And I thought, isn't this remarkable? With the strategy people, either nobody cared or nobody saw that we were missing a letter in the alphabet. And with the project management people, no one would let us move forward until we had resolved the issue of the missing E. And I thought, boy, we talked about different types of people in different businesses. That's a pretty remarkable little insight right there. So, okay, what I'd like you to do is total things up. And we'll just have to do this. For those of you that are remote, you'll just have to do this in your own room. But I would like a kind of a show of hands. How many people, and let's start out, how many people found themselves to be a black pen person? It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have about 7 people. How many, let's start the other end. How many people identified themselves as a red pen person? We've got about the same number, 7 people. And how many people identify themselves as a yellow pen person? So I'd say we've got roughly, 20-something people, something like that. So what we've got is the same, roughly, bell curve distribution that I was showing before. You always get that, with one exception. And I think herein lies the answer to the question, why is it that people in Washington don't draw pictures, and why is it that we don't draw pictures in business? Even though it is, as we just tested, for at least 3/4 of us, perceived as at least a valuable way to think about things. I gave a talk at the NEA, the National Education Association, about a year and a half ago. We had about 150 people in the room. Every single one of the people, these are teachers and academic administrators, every single person in the room identified themselves in the same test that you just took as a red pen person. Every single one. And that is unique to any other organization that I've seen. All of a sudden, to me, this needs far further testing. Nothing that I showed you is scientifically valid, but at least it's the same test delivered to different audiences. So one anomalous result compared to all of the others was when I was working with people who are associated in their career with education. And all of a sudden it becomes clear, if we cannot train, test, teach, because we don't believe as educators that pictures, that visual thinking is a valid way of thinking, then of course it's not something that any of the rest of us do in the rest of our lives. And that is, in my opinion, the number one thing that we need to begin to look at. Given the fact that we have this incredible array of talent and ability to approach problems from a number of different ways, one of those, one powerful way, is from a visual perspective, it is sad that when it comes time to presenting information in business, this is what we almost always do. We know now, from a cognitive and an understanding perspective, this is pretty much the worst way possible to deliver information to someone in real time. If, as Rob mentioned earlier, the idea of communication is trying to get what's in my head into your head as quickly, as efficiently, as believably as possible, this is just about the worst way I can do it. It's a very simple reason why. The human brain, as I mentioned earlier, wants to understand. So the moment someone gets up in front of us and begins to talk, our brain is really geared up, really excited, hoping to get that dopamine shot of clarity and understanding. And if we don't get it right away, we start to tire out, and we follow along about this far in. And then we hit a kind of a saturation point. And until our brain has had the opportunity to assimilate what it has just learned, it pretty much shuts down for everything else that's going to come later on. And this is the big mistake in the way, people will badmouth PowerPoint. PowerPoint is not the problem. I'm using PowerPoint right now. I just use it a little bit differently than most people do. PowerPoint's just a tool. I mean, blaming PowerPoint for bad presentations is like blaming a hammer when the building falls down. The hammer's not at fault. I think it was the person who was wielding the hammer or who might have architected that house who's probably the one at fault. So, obviously, if you haven't gotten the point by now, I do believe that it is critical for all of us, as we become more globalized. Oh my gosh, you know this better than anybody. We're now doing a meeting where we've got people in, I don't even know how many different locations. The ability to convey our ideas with these simple pictures, drawn on the back of a napkin or on a whiteboard or on a computer, doesn't matter, is critical. So I'm going to spend the rest of our time, we've got about 15 minutes or so, showing you how I go about drawing a picture to solve any problem. We start every problem-solving picture the same way. On your napkins, we don't think about what picture we're going to draw. We don't worry that we can't draw. We draw a circle. We just draw a circle. And in the upper left-hand corner, I'd love you to draw a little circle. And then we give it a name. And in this case, I'd like you to call it me. And if you want some extra credit, go ahead and make it look a little bit like you. Did I worry about what picture I was going to draw? No. Draw a circle and give it a name. And invariably, the name that you give the first circle will be the thing that is top of mind as you are worrying about your problem. And guess what? It will almost always be me. The number one thing that we worry about, it may be my company, it may be my project, but it may be today. But as a starting point, we always pick something that is kind of self-reflective. What is at the center of my problem? In this particular case, it's going to be me. Now we'd like you to draw another circle and make this one bigger, maybe a little bit lumpy if you like, and this one we give another name. I want to call this one my problem. The brain is now ready, and something completely different is happening as we look at this picture than would be happening if we were just talking about it. Because we can see the two circles, our brain is saying, why is one bigger than the other one? And what's the relationship between them? What's the connection? What's going to be the next thing? Our brain is already anticipating. And with that, I want to stop for a second. Our brain is now ready. I want to run very quickly through a case study where I put exactly this drawing style into the process. 3 years ago now, a friend of mine graduated from Harvard Business School. Bill Gates was the commencement speaker. Mr. Gates was not talking about software. He was not talking about Microsoft. He was talking about the Gates Foundation and philanthropic giving. And what Bill Gates said was this. My friend sent me this quote, so I like it. The barrier to change is not too little caring. It is too much complexity. To turn caring into action, what I really love. We need to see a problem. We need to see a solution and see the impact. But complexity blocks all three steps. To which I say, you are absolutely right. Let's face it, the fact is, we all talk about simplicity, but it is very hard to be simple. It is far easier to be elaborate and far easier to be complex. It's infinitely easier, and I'm the worst example of this, of saying more than needs to be said to really get the point across. I want to give you an example from work that I have done with Microsoft, and this I have been given the public approval to share this. This is work that I was able to do with Microsoft Finance, not a product group. This is the group that is responsible for monitoring all of the finance activity under CFO Chris Liddell at Microsoft. The task was this. If today, most people in financial analytics look at something like this most of the day, that may be fun. This is a series of Excel spreadsheets, and they'll know that there are people out there who are able to look at this cell, compare it to this cell, pivot it in this particular way, get a result, come up with this, and get some insight. You know, we should change the price of Windows, or we should make more Xboxes, or something. And they're able to determine that by looking at the data. But it's labor-intensive, it's tricky, and it's possible to miss a lot, because it's really a challenging process to really glean insights out of such a tremendous amount of data. So Mr. Liddell put the challenge to his finance team to say, just let's blue sky for a little bit. I've got a conference coming up. I'd love to show a demo piece of software of what we might be able to be thinking about in the future about the way we could look at financial analytics programs. Maybe they don't need to look like this. Well, why not? So he hired myself and some other folks to come in and build this prototype. And we had 6 weeks before the conference. Now, all of you who develop software know that the right way to do it is to go out and identify a whole bunch of users, people who are experts in their field, who are using pieces of software, monitor their activity, do an enormous amount of user research, come back, sit on the findings. We didn't have time for that. We basically had 2 weeks to come up with what we were going to do, and then 4 weeks to build it. So I said, let's do it differently. Same thing I did with Tony Jones. Let's get 12 of your best financial analysts, bring them into a room, and for 2 days we're just going to lock the door, and we are not leaving until we've drawn out what is the number one problem that they really think a new piece of software might help them solve. And I want to share with you what we drew. These are the actual pictures that we drew, and we started exactly the same way as you just did on your napkin. We drew some circles, and we gave them names. We identified a cast of characters. And in the little drama that's about to unfold, we have 3 main characters. We have the CFO and 2 presidents. President just happens to be a term that Microsoft uses for the head of a large division. So what happens? The play goes like this. Once a quarter, the CFO asks the presidents to come in and report on how their finances are going. We've all been there. One of the presidents says, oh, we had a great quarter last quarter, but next quarter's going to stink. And the other one says, oh my gosh, last quarter was terrible, but next quarter's going to be absolutely great. And the CFO looks at these 2 different piles of paperwork and these 2 different results and says, wait a minute, you're not even comparing the same thing. And he throws them out, closes the door and says, wait a minute, I don't want to hear from you until you can come back to me with 3 things. I want metrics that match. I want better backward-looking analysis of what happened so that we can have better forward-looking insight into what we should do. So the 2 presidents then, kind of chagrined, run out in the hall and they say, he wants everything. What should we do? We can't anticipate what he's going to need in any one given meeting. What should we do? Well, they agreed, let's just go back to our offices, print out everything we have, and take it back to him. Because the answer's in there somewhere. And then the process begins again. That was identified as the scenario that we built out, the number one real-world problem that they actually face. So we said, well, if we were to fix that through our magic piece of software, what point in that cycle would we want to address? And we identified it was at that point where this question of let's bring him everything. That's not what we want to do. Let's create a piece of software that would allow anybody who looks at it to find in it whatever they needed by accessing multiple sources of data. So yes, let's create a portal, a kind of a financial dashboard, if you will. Not a tremendous insight there, but what's amazing was the process we went through to realize that is in fact what we needed. And then we went ahead and started mocking up what such a portal might look like, and it would be a very data-intensive but very visual set of frameworks, where instead of looking at a spreadsheet to determine relative profitability and size of different sections within the company, we would make a tree map, heat map, if anybody's familiar with the smart money map of the market. Imagine if you just did that for your company. The size of each box represents the total revenue generated by any one division. The color of the box represents whether it's ahead of projection or behind projection. It was bananas. Imagine if we could do that. All of a sudden, in about a quarter of a second, I could see the entire operations of the company. And then I could drill down. And if I wanted to see the data behind it, I could have a little tab I'd pull up, and there would be the raw data if that's what I felt more comfortable with. I can't show you any more of the interface, but the point I wanted to make is the drawings I have just shown you, including this one, are the actual drawings that we made, that I made, in working with the executives at Microsoft. I was terrified going into a meeting to bring a user interface design that looked like this. I was even more terrified to bring into a meeting a summary of a scenario that looked like this. I mean, let's face it, these are kind of crappy looking cartoony things. But I didn't have time to do anything else. In my former life, I would have gone into a fancy, Illustrator program and cleaned everything up and made square boxes and spent hours really lavishing detail on it. I didn't have time. I took them in the raw drawings, and the most amazing thing happened. We had the most productive meeting I've ever seen. Everybody agreed on that is the right scenario. Boy, have you guys in that room with the whiteboard or nailed what it was. And yes, we are so excited by that interface. You know what? No one's talking about what color it is. Does it have the right data? I mean, the data is physical data. It's full of squiggles. At the end of the meeting, on 2 separate occasions, executives who'd been in the meeting came up to me and said, Dan, we really liked those simple pictures you drew. We think that they had a really positive effect on the way that we were able to make decisions in the meeting. What software did you use to draw them? And I thought, you got to be joking, right? So I go back. I said, oh, it's Gray Matter 1.0 and Pen and Paper 1.0. And I said, well, this is true. They said, who makes that? What I like to make is we do move on to unwritten rule number 2. The more human our picture, the more human our response. I want to share with you very quickly, I promise a little bit of neurobiology. What this means is we like to look at things that match the way we're hardwired to see the world. We are all hardwired to see the world from a process perspective in the same way. The visual signal that comes into our eyes is way too much data for us to process at any time. So our system has evolved to become really good at breaking down the entire visual signal into a set of specific pathways, and then addressing each one of those pathways in parallel, and then adding up the data later on to generate the whole picture that we're now seeing hundreds of times a second, illustrating the sense of the world around us. One of those pathways, gotta love the scientists, is called the what pathway. It identifies what we're looking at. Another pathway, located in a completely different part of the brain and separated by 30 million years of evolution, is something called the where pathway. It doesn't know what we're looking at, but it knows where stuff is. The reason this is important is one could make the argument that you can break down the entire visual system into 6 distinct pathways. And if that's true, and that's generally considered to be fundamentally true by the neuroscientists and vision scientists I've spoken to, you could pretty much make that argument. It would stand. I thought, if that's true, then we do not need to know how to draw hundreds of pictures to solve any problem. If our brain is breaking everything that we see in our entire life into these 6 different work streams, what would happen if we just learned how to draw 6 different pictures? One that gives each stream the type of information that it's looking for. All of a sudden, our pictures wouldn't be confused anymore. They would be just feeding the brain exactly what it needs in order to process the idea. So I came up with something that I call the 6x6 rule that says that for each one of the ways our brain is hardwired to look at the world, there is one corresponding picture that we would draw to represent that. And for the next few minutes, I want to share with you as we go back to our napkin. And then I'm going to turn things over to Rob to let this close out, and then we'll go into some Q&A. But I'm going to go on for about the next 10 minutes. I'm going to blow my time limit by about 5 minutes on this. But I think this is important. the next time we look at any problem, and I don't know in your business, you may call them opportunities. I believe in transparency, just give disclosure. They're problems. Let's just call them what they are. We will never look at a problem again as one big scary thing that's about to overwhelm us. We will do what our brain does. We will actively do it. We will break that problem up into 6 different slices, just like a pizza. And I'd like you to break your circle up into 6 slices, and we will address those slices in a serial fashion. We're going to go right around it, adding them up as we go. This is what our brain does. We're now going to do it. The first thing that we see, actually the first 3 slices all take place at exactly the same time. One of the first things that we see, as I identified before, what is in the world in front of us. So, for example, we might see in a simple picture that there is a girl with a dog. We might see people sitting at a table. We see the nouns of our world. We see the objects that are in front of us. If the problem that we face, or the description of the problem that we want to convey, is one that relates to the what's of our world, the physical object, we just draw a simple portrait. So, for example, that might be a man, that might be a woman, that could be a car, that could be a box. A simple portrait, just enough information to convey the essence of what makes that object distinct from that object. And yes, grossly oversimplified is entirely the point. We don't need that much to identify one thing from another thing. Here's an example of a series of portraits. This is something called the Wong-Baker Faces Pain Rating Scale. This was invented by 2 doctors for use in emergency rooms where there may be a language problem. The doctor points to some part of the patient's body. The patient points there. The doctor is now beginning to make a diagnosis without ever having spoken a word. Here's another simple little portrait just to show you kind of the tremendous amount of information that can be conveyed within simple pictures. This, believe it or not, is a visual representation of the second most important financial decision that most Americans will ever make. Am I going to get an automatic, or am I going to get a manual? For 280, I really, really strongly encourage that. But simple picture that can convey a tremendous amount of information. Slice number 2, the how much slice. This is the part of our mind that's taking a snapshot of number. Okay, I've identified that there are people. Now, how many of them are there? Different processing, different things, different set of interests that we have. There are so many people. There are so many birds. There are a few, what have you. The picture that we draw when we want to address a how much problem, something we're all familiar with, we do it all the time, is we draw charts. A visual representation of numbers. That's all the chart is, a visual representation of quantity. Here's a chart, a simple bar chart that shows the price of tea in China. Here is a simple pie chart that shows, again, the typical breakdown of how people in a typical business meeting go about solving problems from a visual perspective. We're going to make our way around this pizza pretty quickly. We're now up to slice number 3, the where. The where does not know what anything is, but it knows where everything is. It's keying off of distances between objects without knowing what those objects are, and more importantly, it's keying off of the distance from me to that object. Evolutionarily speaking, this is one of our first pathways that vision is presented, because the issue was, I don't care what the thing is. If it's near me and it's accelerating towards me, I have that whole fight or flight choice to make instantly. Only later on did we get to the point where we could identify, oh, what's coming towards me is not a threat. Maybe it's my friend, in which case I don't need to run, as opposed to the tiger that's running towards me. If the problem we face is a where problem, where do all of these different objects sit in space relative to each other, and in particular relative to me? The picture that we would draw is a little map. So, for example, here's my house, here's the river, here's the buried treasure, here's the path I would take to get to my buried treasure. A map, a where picture, can show where all the pieces fit together in a puzzle. A where picture can show where all the pieces fit together in an organization. A map, a where picture, can show where all the pieces fit together in a concept. How many of us love Venn diagrams? A Venn diagram is a simple map that shows the spatial relationship of 2 or 3 or 4 different ideas. Where do they intersect? Just like where's the border between these 2 countries? How much overlap do they have? Switzerland right here in the middle. Slice number 4. Building upon the 3 that we've seen previously, believe it or not, the number 1 way that we recognize the passage of time is through sight. We know that time has passed, not through some kind of internal clock that's ticking away like our CPUs have in them. We recognize the passage of time more than anything else by watching for changes in the what and the wheres that we've already identified. Are you following me? If I identify something, I identify Rob. I met Rob earlier. The what pathway says that's the person, that's Rob. I know. The where pathway says, I don't know who that is, but there's someone 30 feet away from me and slightly below me, slightly to the right, not rushing towards me, no sweat. Rob, would you do us a favor? Would you stand up and just walk a little bit? For those of you virtually, you won't be able to see this, but we're just watching Rob walk. Thank you, Rob. You're done. You may go back and sit down. Thank you. That was wonderful. You're done. What just happened? Our mind did a little bit of deductive reasoning. It said, wait a minute, I've identified the what as Rob, and the where is there. Now the where is changing. I've got 2 decisions. I've got 2 answers to that. Either it's a different what. Rob is somehow being a different Rob. Or, my other option is to think time must have passed. When we watch something move, we are literally seeing the 4th dimension. We are literally seeing time. If we deny ourselves vision, one of the first things we lose is our ability to know the passage of time. We see when. The picture that we would draw to represent when is a very simple timeline. I'm kind of a space geek. Kennedy says again, we're going to the moon by the end of the decade. Pretty clear where picture. Everybody knows where we're going. Our vision couldn't be any clearer than that. Wonderful. Unless you happen to work for NASA, when the question is, when are we going to do this? We're going to do this in 9 years? I don't think so. The picture we now draw is, okay, when do we need to get everything done in order to reach that deadline? Call it the Gantt chart, Microsoft project chart, whatever. Swim lane, you name it. They're very simple. They're timelines. They're showing the passage of time. We've got 2 more slices to go, then we're done. Want to confuse people? Go ahead and make a looping time. That means your client really spinning for a long time. Quick, we have to pay you again? We add all of these up, our mind starts to see cause and effect. Back to this little drawing of kids and dogs, we might be able to say, well, in this picture, if the dog sees some birds, these are birds over here, the dog will run to the bird. And if the dog runs to the bird, and if the dog hits this baby carriage, these parents are going to panic. Based on things that we see, we watch for cause and effect. And we learn how the world works based on the things that we see happen. The picture that we would draw, if we have a how problem, how does this actually work? What will happen if I push this button? The picture that we would draw is a flowchart. This happens, which leads to this, which leads to that, or possibly to that. Here we have a simple little flowchart of how the human brain works. Sensory information comes in. It's processed in our reptilian brain, comes out in the form of behavior. We humans are very lucky. We have this very fancy neocortex up on top that allows us to do a whole lot more sophisticated processing, which comes out in a whole lot more sophisticated behavior. And the last one, the last flight, the why flight, adds up everything that we've seen. And this really is the way, one of the primary ways as infants, as we're watching the world go by, and we're seeing over and over how one thing triggers another. We're watching the how over and over and over again. We begin to make up the rules of why the world is the way it is. Why does this happen? And in this particular case, with that picture I just showed you, the rule that we might deduce based on what we have seen is that dogs clearly love birds, but birds clearly do not love dogs. And now we've got a nice little equation, a rule of the world that we have learned by looking at the world and seeing it. And we close all the way around our pizza by saying the picture that we want to draw for the most sophisticated discussion of why the world is the way it is we draw a simple little visual equation, just like my dog loves my bird and my bird does not love my dog. And what I mean by that is we might draw something as simple as this. A square plus a triangle equals a circle, and that's the way it is. Now you might be asking me, well, Dan, what does that mean? A square plus a triangle doesn't equal a circle. Well, it does. As we all know, if I take a square, what does delta represent? Delta represents change. A square plus change equals a circle. A very simple visual way to make a rule that underlines what happens in the world around us. I am now finished. I know I've gone a little bit over time. I appreciate you letting me continue to talk. And Rob has a couple of closing arguments to make. And I just wanted to say this. The next time you face any problem whatsoever, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be personal, it could be financial, it could have to do with your job, it could have to do with your client work, your consulting, it doesn't matter. Try this. Take out your piece of paper. Draw that first circle. Look at what starts to emerge. See what opportunities are in there. Imagine how you can manipulate those opportunities, maybe in your drawing, and then be able to immediately show to someone else how your idea has come together. And all of a sudden you'll find that solving problems really does work when we just draw. Thank you so much. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you, everybody. Dan, thank you very much. I mentioned earlier on in the presentation that Dan and I had a moment to collaborate beyond as we were putting this together. And as we were kind of finishing off our beer yesterday, and I said, hey, I want to run something by you. I took what you said to heart, and I was able to kind of go back and take this, 30 to 60 slides, depending on which account manager you have, customer story, and condense it down to my version. I'm a business transformation specialist with Nexus, so my main role is to really kind of talk about the value in all these great applications that we sell. What does it really do to the business? So this whole concept to me of being able to draw it out with simple pictures to get presidents and CFOs of companies to get the vision so that they'll actually fund the development of the project is where I help our account team do that. And so when I showed Dan, I was very proud of my 4 slides. I had boiled the ocean down to these 4 graphs. And what I learned from him is, PowerPoint's okay. It's okay to use a graph as long as your graph has the right amount of visual information. Dan took one look at it, I really like it, but one of the graphs is a little bit off. And so I'm now going to share with you what we had come up with. This will be the first time I've shared this in a live collaborative environment, so a great test bed. But this is my newly minted version of our company story and our value proposition, and I'm hoping it's not going to take much longer than a minute or two. The main reason behind the business transformation, what do you really get out? What's the core element of all these collaboration applications today? If you think about what we're doing today, we're taking a concept, we're taking a vision that we have, and we're now plugging into a network platform that's enabling us to take that vision, that concept, and everything that we're covering today and extend the reach of it anywhere in the world live. People from other cities are able to watch it. They're able to follow what we're doing. They're able to take the test themselves. They're able to listen, and they're even going to be able to participate in Q&A. The ability to be able to do that compared to a few hundred years ago, you write a love letter to somebody who's on a ship for 6 months. And comes back, and we have instant ability to communicate with our customers, our supply chain, with everybody. And so what I found is going through all these slides, there's a lot of information about the products themselves, about the technology, and how great it is. But other than a few marketing slides of, the overall business benefits, it really didn't get into calculating the value. Okay, hey, if I put this IP network in, and I put a call center on it, and I do video conferencing and everything else, what's really the return on my investment? And so what Dan helped me to show is that, when I take a look at our core business, we're developing IP networks. On top of those IP networks, after 99 and 2000, we were so confident in them that we put phones and we even put our call centers, the front line of business with our customers, onto that network. We then started to get into, we're doing so much business now, we're going to need to start conferencing with our customers. Web conferencing, audio conferencing like we're doing today, get everything together. Then video became prevalent. And video conferencing, video on demand, YouTube, you name it, it's out there. Now I've seen a bunch of people today with their flip cameras. On top of video, we want to know, okay, now that we have all these great tools, where is everybody? They're going to be able to make the meeting. So we bring in the concept of presence, kind of like an IM. Hey, somebody's online, I'm going to chat with them real quick while they're here. Then we wrap all this stuff together to create a business-to-business type of a network where now I can share my video with my customers, my supply chain, I know when they're available, so that overall, as the project comes together and the manufacturer, the partner, and the customer are all involved in this project, we've now created this fantastic network where instantly we can get together and make sure that everything gets done successful. So what does that end up doing for the customer? So what I want to share with you is the business case that we've developed at Nexus in that when I joined the company, I actually joined the company in early 2005. We started our partnership with Cisco in 2004, and let's just say that this is today. When I joined the organization, we're a sales and service organization, so we're primarily measured in revenue, right? We were a $47 million company when I joined. This past year, we were upwards of $185 million in 5 years. There's a value proposition in there. How has a company that is relatively a 400-person company had upwards of a 250% growth in their revenues over 5 years? Did they hire a whole bunch of people? Did they go to an 800-person company? Actually, what we did was it was about 53% increase in the actual people that we had. Okay, another person there. That 53% increase in I guess I should probably generalize here, otherwise we get into math, but we're essentially looking at 170% increase in productivity. So we didn't ramp up our staff to hit that number. We made the staff that we had more productive. How did we do that? Well, it was very simple. We gave everybody cake, and we made them super people. What are the inherent characteristics of super people? They can fly, they kind of know everything, maybe they have X-ray vision. So flying's a little overrated. If you've been anywhere in Europe, you're probably not flying anywhere anyway. But so we decided to give them the ability not to fly, but to be everywhere at once. And that's kind of how we look at the video, the web, and the audio conferencing. The presence ability is for them to be able to know who else is available. Who else of this, league of justice and superheroes that we have in our SE community know that if I have a data center question, I can now tap into somebody who's a data center expert because I know that they're available. And so the whole idea behind this is the value proposition that we got was taking a step and leveraging this platform that we have built over the last 5 years. This wasn't something that, we decided 2004 we were here, and then all of a sudden in 2010 we're going to bring in all this technology. What we did is we started with a collaboration strategy 5 years ago that was all built on just developing an IP network. And in 2005, we put our phone system on it, we built our call center on top. And then around late 2005, 2006 is when we started with the web and audio conferencing. And so this trend and all these graphs that I showed with Dan, all these graphs had this nice hockey stick curve. And my last graph was this really nice, colorful adoption of technology terms with all these blocks. And one of the things Dan pointed out was like, the blocks are nice, but it doesn't look like we really changed anything. And so the very simple analogy that he gave me is it kind of looks like some of these towers will tip over the more applications you start putting on them. And what I realized is you're absolutely right. We need to have a platform, a foundation. And so the stair-step model shows that we started with the IP network in 2004, but that foundation has taken us through to today. That foundation is how we built our call center, our audio conferencing, and our collaboration network on top of that. It is that collaboration network that has given us the ability to turn regular people into super people and to have just a small increase in employees be an amazing impact on our productivity, which in our case, a sales and service organization, that productivity relates to revenue. And so that's my company story and value proposition, and I'm sticking to it. So what I'd like to leave some closing remarks here, and actually in the back of the room, I drew myself some pictures. I drew myself a sandwich, which unfortunately I can't eat, but it's to remind me that, tell you guys that for San Jose, Bellevue, and Irvine locations, we're welcoming you to stay and join us for lunch. We have lunch providers. There's also going to be a survey. There'll be a survey sent out to anybody that registered for this event, both in person and via WebEx. And when you receive that email survey form, it's important that you respond because that's how we're going to get your copy of Dan's book to you. For those of you that are here in the San Jose location live, Dan's actually going to sign a number of these books and still working. And you'll be able to pick yours up on the way out. So please fill out the survey form because that gives us a chance to find out how we can make this better and put it on again. Everybody that completes the survey will receive a copy of Dan's book. The notebook which is Unfolding the Napkin. It's actually more of a workshop book, and I just got a copy of it thanks to Dan last night. I'm very excited about it. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you for coming out and taking the time today. I trust that this workshop was incredibly effective and very helpful for you in coming up with new ideas and being successful what you do. And at this point, I would like to open it up for Dan and I for question and answer.
I thought it was a great presentation. It's very helpful. You know, when you did your presentation, it seems like you're using a yellow pen technique where you had pretty drawn slides and then you drew on them. It seems to me that actually drawing them out, right, it draws more attention for me personally. But then the trade-off is it takes a lot of time to draw. So if you can comment on, you know, when you sort of use the yellow pen and you use the black pen.
I think, Joe, that is a really good question. And you saw through part of my secret. You're right. Many of the things that I just showed you, I had drawn in advance, and then I drew on top of them. What typically happens, and you notice something that most people do not. Most people, after a presentation like this, will come up to me and they'll say, how were you able to draw all of that stuff that quickly? We perceive, if I make a few marks on a page, if I was to say, you know, there are 6 questions we're trying to resolve, by virtue of my adding something onto a picture that's already there, for most people, the brain assumes that I'm drawing the entire picture. It's a pretty remarkable thing that happens. And when we see someone, it's a little bit of magic. It's the same thing I think Rob was very effectively talking about right from the beginning. I have seen this every single time. When I go into a meeting, and I'm always prepared. I have an idea of what we're going to talk about, and I've usually worked through the drawings that I think will be appropriate. When I go up to the whiteboard and start drawing them, it is pure magic that happens in the room. It's something, if you have not done this, you have to experience this yourself. If you want to change the dynamic, in particular in a sales meeting, do not go in with your PowerPoint. Go ahead and prepare your PowerPoint as you normally would, and bring it along with you, and put it on the table, and try something else. Instead of saying, thank you for letting us come, let's walk through the history of our company and our proposal. Say, you know, I've got all of that if you want it, but I want to try something different. Do you mind if I just go to the whiteboard? There are 3 central ideas I want to share with you today, and draw a little Venn diagram and label them. You've already won the job. Because what will happen is, as you create that picture, it makes no difference how ugly it is. People understand what you're seeing, and they will want to participate in a way that they will not if you come in with your polished can presentation all ready to go. And so I'm answering a lot of things here, but the secret magic, the secret sauce, goes back to that rule number 2. The more human your picture, the more human your response. We want to reply to other people. If we see someone taking a risk by drawing something out, by being kind of apparently spontaneous in sharing the idea, we do not judge them harshly for it. On the contrary, we judge them very well. And if you want to get decisions made in a meeting, it's really remarkable the power there is to do that. When instead of saying, I've finished my piece, here it is, agree with me or not, instead walk people through how you created it. In essence, it sounds very mercenary, but the fact is you pretty much already won. And the moment that the person across the table says, wait a minute, can I borrow your pen for a second because I want to change something? Now you're in. You've gone from my telling you something to us actually having a dialogue. And the key point, and I'll shut up, is it doesn't matter when you made your picture if you got it all right. When you come in with something polished, you better have everything right. Because someone will invariably pick up on the things you got wrong and blow your whole concept out. People don't do that when you draw it in front of them, or you're a little bit more upfront or spontaneous, apparently spontaneous. You've actually rehearsed a lot. Because they will say, well, I really like your concept, I get it, I think you got this part wrong. And then you hand them the pen and say, okay, can you make it right? So, good question. Rob, do you want to add anything?
Well, I wanted to add, I think somebody did a fantastic job and left us a car.
Good.
E for excellent. Anybody who left, you know, what is it? What kind of car is it? There you go. The other quick thing I neglected to mention is that also with survey responses, they'll be put into a drawing for a Wacom tablet, a USB tablet that you can plug in, and also have another way to facilitate some of these drawings on a PC. We'll open it back to Q&A.
In the back, you had your hand up there? Yes, strike, sir.
Great presentation. I had a question about, you've got the 6, break the problem down into 16.
Yes.
Elimination thing. things that the bell curve of where we all fall in personality types, the black pen, red pen, yellow pen.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that it seems that each of those are critical in any problem-solving arena. The red pen guys will say, what did you miss? And the yellow pen will add the black pen, but you can't have too many all in one spot as teachers because nobody does anything. So if you're building it, as you've gone to lots of different companies and organizations, have you found that when staffing a team or building a team of people to solve a problem, that following that ratio of people in the team gets the problem solved a little bit better?
That is a fantastic question. The answer is yes. I do a lot of workshops, and one of the first things that we do when I offer a workshop is we run through the test, and we get, again, a rough assessment of how people fall across that spectrum. And then we make sure that each team is a cross-section of all of those. Because it's a disaster if you get all the highly conceptual black pen people sitting at one table. You know, they'll draw the most beautiful pictures you can imagine, and they'll just go so far off into the ether sometimes. And if you have a table of all the red pen people, they just sit there talking at each other the whole time. So yes, the answer is, and I'm glad you said that because it's actually going into the next book that I'm working on, really how to build organizations and teams that make sure we're covered on having all those people participate.
Is there a number of people, I know it's got the 7 number, where you can't get beyond 7 people in the unit because they feel like nothing is done.
Yeah.
So in that ratio, is there a particular number where you say that the team should be bigger than X number?
No. I mean, working with groups of 3 is always great. Working with groups of 5 is great. Beyond that, I think it's unmanageable to have more than 5 people in a room anyway, if you're working on one thing. But you have to sometimes. I think you would start that question.
How do we sign up for virtually? They do your presentations virtually. They do one-city presentations. How is this concept working for you? I mean, are you looking at the whiteboarding like normally with WebEx?
Sure. The question is, how does all of this idea of being able to draw spontaneously work in a virtual environment where it's one broadcasting to many? I'll answer quickly, and then I'm going to ask the expert to answer. My anecdotal experience has been, I've done a lot of sessions online now, distributed virtual workshops. Nobody hangs up the phone, because what I do is the same thing that you've just seen. You imagine your typical conference call, people, because you can't see them, are off actually doing something else and sort of half listening. When people notice that you've taken over the screen through this kind of WebEx setup, and you are now drawing, nobody leaves. The magic still works, even virtually. You're following what I mean? If you want people to pay attention to what you have to say, I find this works extremely well. Now, I'll turn it over to
I agree, and I think it's the whole aspect of, as you're drawing something out, the human mind is kind of locked into it. Like, what's going to happen here? I need to see how this is going to finish out, and then I need to determine if I agree with it. The tools that we use, like WebEx or even to TelePresence with PowerPoint, like Dan's using, are really just that a tool, just like if we're in the same room when we have a whiteboard. What I have seen is that when we go out on calls or we go to training, in this type of organization, with Cisco and Nexus, we're always kind of black pen people. We like to get up and draw stuff out and throw stuff at it. In the early days, kind of, you would just turn your webcam around and, can you see this? Can you do it? But there's whiteboarding features in WebEx. What Dan is using today is just annotation, just a feature of PowerPoint, just the annotation. And in particular, there is something to say about the tool, and that's why we're rattling off a wacom tablet. My first experience with trying to whiteboard at WebEx is trying to use my little mouse button on my laptop, and my squares go all over the place, and I can't do this. So I looked online. If anybody figured this out, of course it was either you can get a tablet PC, which I already have one, or for like $8 you can get a little plug-in USB stylus and tablet that allows you to do everything else. It can annotate over PowerPoint. It can be used as the WebEx interface for using the whiteboard. And so I actually rolled out a program in our company that we're calling Wingman, which is kind of like a virtual resource. And we're testing a bunch of these different types of tools, tablet PC, wacom tablet.
to see how our engineers, now that somebody can see them on a webcam, they can pull up a presentation, but 9 times out of 10 at dance point, you get something in the presentation where you need to defer and answer a specific question. The fact that they can now use that stylus as a mouse and click on a whiteboard and then immediately start drawing has made the interface issue kind of dissipate. I will warn you that for me personally, it took about 30 minutes of just drawing stick figures and getting the hand-eye coordination down. It was like riding a bike. Once I got it in, I was handwriting notes to my boss and things like that on it, and I really started to take off in this model. My rollout presentation, which will actually kind of touch on two of the questions, my rollout presentation to the field on Wingman was past images that I had already pre-drawn that I was going to annotate over. And then the other thing was actually using the Wacom tablet and showing everybody, here it is, this is what I'm using in case you want to ask. And, you know, it takes a few minutes to get used to it. Once you're used to it, the more you use this tool, I have a new baby, I get to work from home and be in 10 different appointments in a day instead of driving, you know, a 6-hour round trip up to LA and back from San Diego. So it's the combination of very simple annotation tools with the power and reach of a collaboration platform like WebEx is fantastic, and I haven't ran into anything that's inhibited my ability to whiteboard on everything just to make it easier.
I think we have a couple of questions on WebEx.
I've got another
So there's a chat feature in WebEx. The people who are virtual are asking some questions. Hi. First of all, there was a comment about something about losing people on WebEx or if they don't hang up. So we have 132 people that dialed in today, and I think we have 128 of them left. So there's a good plug for you there. That just came in. And then
Who are the other four?
So the question, one of the chats came in, is that are there more online reference materials, logos, icons, regression materials, and industry-specific icons, etc., that you could share with me?
Unfortunately, the good answer to that isn't the one that I can give. I do not know of simple libraries of industry-specific icons that people could use to paste into their presentations. And in a way, that's unfortunate. At the same time, I think it's a good thing. I need to really, really strongly emphasize that in spite of the fact that I have been drawing in front of you and Rob has been drawing in front of you, what we're really talking about has very little to do with your ability to draw. It has to do with an ability to think in a particular way. The end result of that is where we have learned to think in a linear fashion in school and therefore write 5-paragraph essays to describe solutions. It's not about learning to type. It's about learning to think. And in this particular case, I'd like to emphasize my point is not about learning to draw. It's not about cutting and pasting stick figures. It's about the act of saying, what do I see in here? Do I see some people? What can I do to represent that those are people? And again, it really doesn't matter how ugly they are. A little circle with a line. Anybody can do that. And the magic happens when I don't want to sound like a kindergarten teacher now, but it is true. When we get out of our own way and on our own just practice, I have an idea. What would that idea look like if I tried to go around the 6 slices of the pizza and draw a picture of what does my idea look like and who's involved, how many people are involved? It will change the way we were thinking about the idea. And that, to me, is the critical part. Does that make sense? The process changes our ability to think about it, and that's the thing that really matters. I wish there were downloadable online libraries. I will make one plug. If someone does go to my own website, thebackofthenapkin.com, no spaces, no hyphens, just one long word, thebackofThenapkin.com, there's a button called Tools, and all of the main tools that are in the book are available for download as PDF. So if someone just wants to download them and print them out, they're all available there.
Any other questions?
Chat questions?
Any other chat questions?
I still want to know who the 4 people are who checked out. And that's the beauty of WebEx. You can track and know who they are, right? Yeah. That's what we mean by presence. Yeah, right. All knowing. Stalking.
There's a question here on chat. What drawing tools are you using with WebEx? Is it a Wacom? And then I think that was answered, but I'll let you guys address that.
It's very simple. I am running out-of-the-box PowerPoint on a tablet PC. The tablet allows me to draw on the screen, but I am not using any software that anybody who doesn't have PowerPoint doesn't already have. PowerPoint has within it an incredibly, remarkably effective set of drawing tools, but they're not called that. So nobody knows that they're there. The one time I got a standing ovation giving a talk like this was when I was at Redmond at Microsoft giving this talk, and at the end of it someone said, I got to ask what kind of software you're using, the assumption being, what Apple or Adobe product are you using? I said, I'm using PowerPoint. They went bananas. Nobody knew that you can draw on PowerPoint. So the way you do it, I'll give you an example really quickly. Believe it or not, the thing that Rob and I are using here is just plain old PowerPoint. Same as anybody would use. The difference is this. I'm in my mode now to create a slide, and I want to draw. Well, where would I go to find tools for drawing? I don't know. I mean, I know how to get shapes and lines. That's not what I'm after. Do this, and this is why nobody knows about it. If you go into the slide presentation mode, all of a sudden these little icons appear down here in the lower left corner. I don't know if you can see all those right there. You see those little things popping up? One of them is a pen. It pops up an entire menu of 10 colors and 10 widths. And if I pick one, I can now draw on my slide anything I want. Quickly, on a tablet it's easy because I can draw on top of it, but you could do the same thing with the Wacom. You could do the same thing with a mouse. It's just tricky. And then the really nice part is when you're all done and you leave, you end the show, it says, do you want to keep your pictures? And if you say keep them, it now has kept them as little vector objects. So you can now create instantly your own library of pictures, which you can now copy and paste. And all of a sudden you don't have to draw it every single time. So now I've got my own little extremely ugly car that I can copy and paste any place I need it. And this is the way I go about making my presentations. I'll sit there on the plane, I'll open up PowerPoint with 4 blank pages. I'll draw a bunch of stuff. I'll quit, I'll keep them, and now I'm done. What we did yesterday. Yeah.
There's one last chat question, and that's, do you know the UPS guy?
I don't know him personally, but a funny story. Does everybody know about the UPS ads that are being referred to? UPS whiteboard? So I was at a talk in Boston, this is just 4 days ago, and the guy who spoke after me was the CFO of UPS. Kurt Cohen is his name. And there was about a 15-minute gap between the end of my talk and his talk. And during that 15 minutes, apparently he was so inspired by this, he ran back and he called someone back at the office in Atlanta and had them email him the latest versions of the clip so he could open up his talk by showing how UPS was using these simple drawings. The sad news is, though, that campaign is now going to be retired. Yes, but the guy who draws the pictures, Andy Azula, interesting story. Are we out of time? Are we going on too long?
Actually, we're only not even a few minutes after the allotted time and
It's a good story. So Andy Azula, who is the creative director at advertising agency down, I think in Charleston, I'm not sure exactly where he was. It was the advertising agency of UPS. They come up with an idea of why don't we have someone draw pictures on a whiteboard with a brown marker of what UPS does to explain all the complex processes. And so they come up with a storyboard, and now they have to do a casting call. So they call in a bunch of actors to try to find the right actor to stand in front of this whiteboard and draw. And they get all of these professional actors in there, and they're really struggling with this drawing thing. So each time one of them does it, Andy Azula, who's the creative director, no acting background, will go up and demonstrate what he wants them to do. And it's all being caught on camera. At times it says, you're so good at this, why don't you just be the one to do it? So all of a sudden he became the UPS whiteboard guy. I've always been curious about his haircut, though. Yeah, that's funny. But they're really good. I mean, there's a perfect example. To add one more point to it, though, for anybody who's seen the UPS whiteboard ad, the first year they did them, they were magnificent. This is something I think I need to be aware of, too. The second year, they over-complexified themselves. I don't think they knew what the success was in the first year. Thought it had something to do with how much information you can convey in a complex picture, as opposed to the reason why they worked the first time was how much you convey through a really simple picture.
Okay. So I guess that ends our question and answer session. Thank you very much. Thanks, Daniel.
Lunch is being served right outside the door. So, and then we'll also bring the books in for Dan to sign.